Last days, the mountain of the Lord's temple will be established as the highest of the mountains. It will be exalted above the hills, and all the nations will stream to it. Many peoples will come and say, "Come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the temple of the God of Jacob. He will teach us his ways so that we may walk in his paths." The law will go out from Zion, the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. He will judge between the nations and will settle disputes for many peoples. They will beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation will not take up sword against nation, nor will they train for war anymore. Come, descendants of Jacob, let us walk in the light of the Lord. This is from Matthew. But about that day or hour, no one knows, not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son, but only the Father. As it was in the days of Noah, so it will be at the coming of the Son of Man. For in the days before the flood, people were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, up to the day Noah entered the ark. And they knew nothing about what would happen until the flood came and took them all away. That is how it will be at the coming of the Son of Man. 2 men will be in the field, one will be taken and the other left. 2 women will be grinding with the handmill, one will be taken, the other left. Therefore keep watch, because you do not know on what day your Lord will come. But understand this, if the owner of the house had known at what time of night the thief was coming, he would have kept watch and not have let his house be broken into. So you also must be ready, because the Son of Man will come at an hour when you do not expect him. So ends the reading of God's holy word.
Here a little bit. Mike referred to it this morning when he thanked Jennifer and Brett for all their work, and Bonnie. Bonnie was here till late last night, very late last night. I was busy celebrating the win of Ohio State, so that she understood. Yeah, right. Anyway, everything looks a little bit different here. We've kind of decided that we're going to go back to a traditional kind of setting. So for Christmas this year, we are setting up the stage up front here to look like an old church with a stained glass window and the pew and everything, and Christmas trees, and of course I'm in this very warm robe that I don't wear very often, so I'm not quite used to it yet. If I need to get to my handkerchief, I don't know how to do that, but you'll bear with me when I have to reach around. But anyway, as we are, I also want to mention that, as you know, Justin and Ashley are leading our youth group, and the youth group is going to a concert next month in December 9th. It's the Newsboys concert. And so all the young people are invited to go to that. Depending on how many we have going, I will need to have some chaperones to go with that. So if you'd like to hear some really loud music, Lee, we can have you join us at the Newsboys concert. They'll be joined by Ryan Stevenson and who else? One other one. Zach Williams, right? Yes, very good. So anyway, that'll be fun night for that. So we'll get those numbers put together and let you know if we need anybody, any adults to go along. I'm also told that because of this light up ahead that I can't move around, so I'm going to use my crutch here behind this old podium. Do you remember this podium? We had it, I think, on Wyckoff, I believe, and we used it in the big building. So we pulled it out of storage, cleaned it up a little bit, and it's part of our traditional setting that we have this week. So, well, as you know, we are approaching Christmas, and we are in the season known as Advent. And Webster defines Advent as the anticipation of the arrival of a notable person, thing or event, like the advent of television was the recognition of the arrival of television. Of course, however, in the Christian church, Advent is the first season of the Christian year. And it recognizes the 4 Sundays that lead up to Christmas. And it is also the anticipation of the arrival of the second coming of Jesus Christ. Since those that were in the first century were the ones that recognized or were looking forward to the first arrival of the Messiah, we get to look at the second arrival. As with any date or holiday that comes up that we anticipate, many of us see the coming of that season with a bit of apprehension. I have to admit, I do. A lot of apprehension. When the calendar approaches a busy time of the year, I tend to get quite anxious. I tend to get quite nervous. I begin to think about all the things that need to be done this time of year. And I often think about the time that is approaching with a certain degree of dread because of all that busyness. Now, I know that most of you really like this time of year, and most of you like the approaching busyness of the season and look forward to things like that. But all I can think about is all the stuff that needs to be done, all the shopping, all the cooking, all the arrangements that need to be made, all the things that need to be done to make sure that other people have a wonderful Christmas. And to boot, my dread is increased by the fact that my favorite radio station begins to play Christmas music instead of my favorite contemporary Christian songs. So I have a hard time moving on from the dread of this time of the year. So perhaps I need to write a sermon. Perhaps I need to focus on a sermon that focuses on the fact that God really wants me to change my attitude. That God really doesn't want me to feel this anxious. That God doesn't want me to look at this time of joy and great anticipation with dread. I bet that if I focused on all that God wants me to focus on and quit thinking of the burden and not the joy, I can look at this very time of year every year with great anticipation, joy, and happiness. And maybe some of you would also do the same. I certainly hope so. Well, what do you think? Should we do that? Okay, I've written the sermon. I don't feel that way yet, but perhaps after delivery of this sermon, I will be able to feel that way. Well, in order to begin this whole thing, I think that we need to look at a couple of questions that come up that you probably don't think about this time of year. But I feel that they are so germane to our existence, to our being, that we need to answer some of these questions that are on our minds and on our minds all the time. That way we'll be able to see God's plan for us. We'll be able to see God's plan for the world and how it all plays out. In each and every year of our lives, these questions can be answered, and how He wants us to feel about what He has planned and what He has done for us. You see, we need to figure out, I think, all the reasons that God did what He did when He created the universe, that He did what He did when He created the earth, that He did what He did when He created mankind, created peoplekind, and why He spoke to some of those people many, many, many years ago, and what He was trying to convey to them, and what He was thinking when He came to earth in human form. Why? Why did God do all that? Why did God create everything that He's created? And perhaps more importantly, why are we here? What's the purpose of all this? Why is it important that we understand who we are and what we're supposed to do in life? Why did God do all that? Sometimes they're pretty tough questions. Once we answer why God created you and me, we'll be able to further understand perhaps why He created the universe. So we're not going to spend time getting into all of that. But today is the beginning of our next sermon series. And this next sermon series will take us through Advent for the next 4 weeks. And it will, of course, include Christmas Eve and, of course, include Christmas morning on Sunday. And it will bring all these answers together for us so that we will have an understanding of just why we're here and who we are. So let's get started. And we thought of a way to get that done and talk about this life that we have. And we thought about calling it, "It Really Is a Wonderful Life." And as we take a different aspect, each different aspect of our lives each week, and we'll find out exactly the wonderfulness of each of those aspects of our lives. We will begin to understand God's great plan for each of our lives, and each one of us has a different plan that God has chosen. Do you know what that is yet? By Christmas morning, hopefully you will. We will begin to understand why God chose to come to us in human form, and we will celebrate this thing called life, because we will begin to understand the real meaning of life. For the next 4 weeks, we're going to be looking at why we are here and how to live out our call. How to live out each of our calls that God has given us. Now, we ended our series last week, and we began the series last week with the great Bible quote from Romans 8:28. Do you have that memorized yet? By the way, are you praying? Are you praying the prayer on the prayer card every night at 8:28 p.m. or every morning at 8:28 a.m.? I know Jennifer is. It's on Facebook, and we enjoy seeing that. But we're to pray for our church and pray for our community and pray for people, either at night at 8:28 or at 8:28 in the morning. However, if you choose to do both times, that's okay. Can't pray too much. So, with that famous Bible quote, Romans 8:28, we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good, for those who are called according to His purpose. Now, I want you to think about 2 words in there, that last part of that verse, called and purpose. Called and purpose are actually connected. They're actually together. These 2 words go together. We are called by God and His purpose to understand His purpose for our life, because it's the same thing. So we're going to discover exactly your calling, each of you, these next 4 weeks, and we're going to discover your purpose. Does that sound like a fair deal? Does that sound good? So you don't want to miss this Advent season, because it's going to answer a lot of questions. Now, when you start to think of calling, what do you think of? Typically, we think of what? The telephone, right? We think of the telephone ringing. And wouldn't it be nice if the phone would ring and it was God once in a while? Or it was God just once saying, "Hey, Lynn, this is what I want you to do for your life. This is who I want you to be." That would answer a lot of questions. So here's some advice. If God calls you on the phone, answer it. Okay? Don't let it go to voicemail. Don't let it go into call waiting. Pick up the phone and answer it. Chances are, He's got something to say to you. Unfortunately, though, God does not contact us in that particular fashion. He just doesn't believe in modern technology, I guess. But he does call us. He calls each of us. Everyone has a calling. Everyone. And it's unique to you. Now, what would be a sermon series without a movie background? So we do have a movie for this season of Advent. Can anybody guess, based on the front of the bulletin, what the name of the movie is? It's a Wonderful Life. Who has not seen It's a Wonderful Life? Georgette, okay. A couple of people. Glenn, really? We'll take care of it. I'll rent it for you this Christmas. It's a Wonderful Life. Well, as you know, for most of you have seen it, George Bailey is played by Jimmy Stewart. And the first clip that we have from It's a Wonderful Life is young George Bailey, having dinner with his father. And at the dinner table, they're discussing George Bailey's call in life. He's trying to figure out what he wants to do. His father, of course, would rather have him stay at home and continue on in the savings and loan. Now, does everybody know what a savings and loan is? For those of you that are much younger, perhaps don't know savings and loan. Savings and loan was what we used to call those institutions where you actually would save money or get a loan for a building project. Banks were something that you went to when you had a checking account. So savings and loans and banks now are all together. So let's take a look at that first clip and see George Bailey trying to figure out what he wants to do. Well, clearly George has not gotten that phone call yet from God, because all he really knows is that he doesn't want to stay at the savings and loan. He just wants to get away from there. If he feels that if he stays there, he'll just go crazy. Now, the movie has a classic line at the end. Does anybody remember what a bell means when it rings? Yeah? An angel gets its wings. That's right. Well, for the rest of this series, every time a bell rings, I want you to think about God's calling you. When that bell rings, the phone is for you. Every time you hear a bell ring, between now and Christmas morning, think about what God really wants you to do with your life. And if you don't know the answer to it, pay attention. So, when we hear that bell, we're going to hear and be reminded that God is calling us. God is calling us to a very unique life. And there's a couple of things that we have to understand about calling before we actually get into specifically what your calling is. As you look in the Bible, in Ephesians 2:10, it says, "For we are God's workmanship, created in Christ Jesus to do good works." In other words, we have a purpose, which God has prepared in advance for us to do. So God has prepared your specific calling in advance. We are God's workmanship. Now, the word for workmanship in Greek is poema, or poema, which is where we get the word poem. So in other words, we are God's poem. He has written it for us. So, we are masterpieces. Some translations of the Bible talk about God's workmanship as God's masterpiece. We are all God's masterpiece. And sometimes you'll hear somebody say, "Well, I'm just not worth anything. I'm just a piece of junk. I'm not a masterpiece." The thing to remember is that Christ did not die for junk. Christ did not die for junk. You are a masterpiece. You're God's masterpiece. You're God's poem. Every one of us has certain good works that we're asked to do, and my good works are different than your good works. Each of us has a unique and challenging call that we're supposed to do. Now, as your pastor, my prayer for you in the next few weeks is going to be from this verse, also from Ephesians. My prayer is that light will flood your hearts. Remember the song, Open the Eyes of My Heart, Lord? From that song actually came from this verse in Ephesians. My prayer is that light will flood your hearts and that you will understand the hope that was given to you when God called you. The hope that was given to you when God called you. God has called every one of us. Now, there are literally hundreds, perhaps thousands of things that the Bible tells us about calling that we need to understand before we actually look at our individual calling. But I'm only going to talk about 8 of them, okay? We're going to go through them quickly because I am aware of the time. First of all, you have to understand that your calling is actually a gift from God. It's His gift. It's an undeserved gift. It comes from His grace, which is the definition of grace, is that it is undeserved, unmerited. In Galatians, God said, God, by His grace through Christ, has called you to become His people. He has given us the gift of a calling. The second thing you need to remember is that you are called for God's purpose. You are not called for your purpose. God didn't make you for you. God made you for Him. So you are called for His purpose. Number 3, God chose your calling before you were ever born. That's why abortion is so bad, because God has called every child before birth. You need to know that as we get ready and look at the next few weeks and what we're going to be talking about, that this calling was actually pre-chosen before you were born. Number 4, this is a very important one to remember. It is one that I am very glad to hear, because it says that my sins, my mistakes, don't change my call. Anything you've done in the past, good or bad, doesn't change your call. God chose your call before you were born, and that doesn't change no matter how much you've messed up in your life. A good example of this is Paul. He was Saul. He was a murderer. He was a blasphemer. Saul made all kinds of mistakes. He stood by while Stephen was being stoned. And look what happened to him. Became the greatest Christian since Jesus Christ. The 5th thing to remember is that we learn about God's calling from the fact that it never, ever goes away. Your calling is permanent. This is a further extension of what we just talked about. Permanent means that nobody can take it from you. Satan can't take it from you. Your calling is permanent. It is with you always. The 6th thing to remember is that your calling is always connected to other people. You can't fulfill your calling on your own. One thing I need to mention before we got into these 8 things was the difference between your calling and your career. Those are 2 different things, by the way. What you do for a living makes a living. What you do for your calling makes a life. Your calling is your lifestyle, is your purpose in life. What you do for a living in your career is what you do to pay the bills, to put food on the table. How wonderful it is if those are the same thing, but that's rare. So your calling is always connected to other people. You cannot fulfill your purpose by yourself. It's impossible. Just as the eye is connected to the body, if you were to remove the eyeball itself doesn't see anything. It must be connected. And of course, ears and hands are all the same way. The 7th thing to remember is that God will always empower you to fulfill your call. If He calls you to do something, if He calls you to be a certain way, He will give you what you need in order to accomplish that. The 8th and final thing to remember about your calling is that there is a prize at the end. A prize is given to you when you live out your call. That's why I'm so excited about this sermon series. That's why I'm so excited about the next 4 weeks, because we're going to be able to understand our call, and we will also be able to get that prize in our sights. And that prize is how you live your life on earth, the joy that you have while you're here, and that prize is the wonderful blessings that God will give you for eternity. But let me just say this. The prize is that you live this wonderful life, because it really is a wonderful life. And you get to share in everything that God has for you in heaven. Are you interested in hearing more about that over the next few weeks? Interested in hearing more about your purpose, why you're here, and how to recognize that, how to pick up the phone every time that bell rings? It's going to be a big-time prize for you while you live out, not just this Advent season, but for the rest of your life. And of course, beyond that as well. God empowers you to live out your call, gives you everything that you need. And that prize at the end and during the pursuit of that call is the most wonderful thing you could possibly ever imagine. Amen.